Hello and welcome to the Daily Loop. Let's get into it. Transfer bids. Alright, just thinking. Well, let's have a look. So this guy got a bit of 485. I don't think we will. I don't think we will accept this. I don't think we will. Let's move on. I think it's just he's not perfect, basically, I think, for various reasons, but he's still I don't know, when we keep looking at these players in the pool and we're saying they're behind where they need to be, this guy isn't in some ways, but in most ways he kind of is, to be honest. So the only real exceptions to that is a tackling, and to a lesser degree, a little bit the aerial ability. The thing is, like, they could start at 60, right? And at this point he's had his training boosts for 16, 17, 18 and 19, so you're saying 4 sets of training boosts to get what is effectively 7 aerial ability over the start point. He's actually is kind of, I guess you could look at it through the lens of behind where he needs to be, but there are some other considerations here, including, for example, we can't sell him because we don't have enough youth players, so we would have to buy another youth player to be able to sell him. And so anyway, it's not even an option unless we could buy one, so let's just worry about it if there's one that we want to buy. I think we wouldn't sell him anyway. I think, just despite that conceptually being behind where he needs to be, at the end of the day we still actually need some youth players, and it's just a little bit expensive in and of itself constantly buying and selling players because of all what's lost in the the signing fees and this and that. So and we're not desperate for the cash at the moment, but anyway, we'll look through that. That could all change if there's a player we're interested in. So as in, we might need the cash and we might be able to sell him because we don't have a full team. The other bid, however, I think we can just I think we can just sell this guy. I think we're just not bothered. I think at the moment we've got, he's like 4th choice keeper. We're happy to keep this other guy around for basically all the next season. We definitely don't need 4 keepers in depth. We would be looking to sell this guy as soon as we get a bid, but even then, even if we sold this other guy now, plus it's easy. I'm just going to sell him. It's not even a conversation, I don't think. We just do not need this kind of depth. 2 is fine with a decent youth one. Basically, is okay. So, right, he's sold. Let's go to the scout of players. We're going to sort by position still. Oh, right. Okay. Quite interesting. A little bit old, but nice wages. Super high shot stopping, decent handling, low parrying, decent agility, decently fast. But yeah, I just think on the whole, we don't. It would all be different if we hadn't already signed this keeper, but we have already signed this keeper. So, yeah, let's move on. If we needed a keeper, though, he's very interesting. There's a good chance we'll end up buying him. He's like in the wage bracket we want. He's a bit on the old side, but I think all things considered, if we didn't have a keeper we were happy with, we would probably get this guy. Right, don't use left back. Don't use. It's decent though if we needed one. Don't use left back again. Oh no, he's a bit slower. So this guy, yeah, just not where he needs to be. But don't use left back. Too low tackling. Very interesting. I mean, I think we will. Pass, but I think he's ultimately compared to not the younger guys, but to this guy. This guy's got higher. What is 700k next season? 600k. Now, this other guy was way less, right? No, not way less. Well, 500. It is interesting because this, obviously, this guy's younger. That's the thing, and he's on low wages. But now we're tying back to that other conversation about. Doesn't make sense to just sell the other guy to buy this guy. Because at the end of the day, this guy is not perfect. He's not that fast. He's not that good in the air. He's bad at marking. He's got horrible positioning. He is just that stopper role. That's it. Whereas this guy is better in the air, better at marking, a bit slower, but better at tackling. I think this guy's definitely better, but obviously he's old. If they were both in the transfer market now, I don't know what we would get. And the reality is to sell this guy now, it's not that expensive because we paid 232. We get back, we basically lose 25% of that. It's like 55k or whatever, plus the signing fee another 23. It's like 80k. Plus the 9 days of wages without him having actually even played a match in the end. It's like a third nearly. It's like 200k in wages. The wages are the big deal, to be honest. Losing out. We've already paid this guy nearly as much in wages as what we paid to buy him, nearly. So the wages are the big deal here. It's interesting. Right, let's just keep looking through the rest and see if there's other decisions before we make this one, because we haven't even got through the centre halves yet. Obviously this guy cost $1 million up front, so that's not insignificant. I guess where I'm going with this to some degree, but then we'll be in the same spot. Like, we would happily swap this guy out for another guy. Then this time around with this guy, it would be like, we'd lose like 320k or something just to sell him before the bid to move for the next guy. So I think we probably won't do this, even though maybe we would get this one if they're both there, but we've already got the other guy, and we're probably at this point we'd just be waiting to swap him out when we get a better opportunity. I guess by better I mean potentially just this exact guy or a very similar guy to this, but just like 22 or 23, just younger. I don't know, it's pretty interesting because he has got that really 78 tackling. How high is that relative to our younger ones? Well, same as this guy. This is what I mean. I think we're better off just waiting for this guy again. Another guy more like this. He's way better actually. So yeah, I think we just wait for. He's lower or whatever, but I think we're just waiting for a younger one. I think. Right, let's just keep going. Too old. Just too low tackling as well, both of these guys. Don't use right back. Ooh, 83 tackling though. Don't use right back. Don't use right back. Don't use right back. Don't use left wing back. Just not quite where he needs to be. Not... Some of the stuff we care about is decent, which grabbed my eye, but then when you just look across all of these really low, it's just not good enough. Yeah, kind of like definitely ticks the boxes to some degree, but just too old right into our wage. But for what we need for our deep line playmaker, pretty good. I think not quite good enough. I think he would have had all of his training options applied by now. Yeah, not quite. It's close. I think if he was a graduate, would be, it'd be different because, well, one, we wouldn't have to pay the 215k for him, but two, it would be different because by the time he gets to now, he'd have a whole set of training boosts applied. Because he's already had a set applied and still doesn't have a single attribute over 60. Lots of stuff still quite low. Key stuff we really care about, like vision, low. Other stuff we really care about, like tackling, not high. Like, I think we just passed. But, again, if it was next season where we had our graduates, maybe. This guy, just too expensive, too old. Don't use right wing back. Don't use right wing back. Not where he needs to be at that age. I think just not quite where he needs to be. Too expensive for us anyway. Just too low passing, tackling. Just again not quite where he needs to be. Too low tackling. I think not quite again, just not quite where he needs to be. I think for us, we're looking at the box-to-box midfielders, and he's just a bit slow to get up and back for that. Doesn't have to be fast, he's just a bit slow. Be behind the play quite often. The vision is low. So, if for example, he was like 65 speed and 65 tackling instead, then maybe we would get him. He still would kind of be behind where he needs to be per se, but he would be close enough to where he needs to be that he could be very good for our youth team and still be a useful backup for the senior team for now. And yeah, he probably wouldn't end up being where he needs to be by the time we get to Division 1 or whatever, but in the meantime he could be very useful. So, but yeah, he doesn't have that, so let's move on. Right, so this guy just too old, too expensive. Yep, this guy too low tackling, too old, too high wage. Yeah, just too low tackling, I think. Too old. I think that speed and work rate combination is too low. 43 might be okay just if he had a really high work rate, but he doesn't. Outside of that, he's decently well rounded, to be honest. If the tackling was a bit higher as well, we might get him. I think not sure. I think then the thing becomes we would probably get him if he was much cheaper and lower wages, but then he isn't, so then there becomes a different question, but close. Don't use left winger, don't use AMLs, so moving on. Too old, don't use AMR. Don't use AMR, but just looking up this guy from the lens of, because he's got 84 speed and some sort of well-rounded attributes, I'm just thinking about adding a position maybe, what he might be able to do. Not seeing much for us though. Somebody else, he might be a pretty good right wing back actually, if you played wing backs. I think he could be pretty decent for that. But if we don't use those, we use right midfielder and left midfielder, so he could be decent for... I think the problem for us, for our wide midfielders, we really want high passing, so he doesn't have that. If he had really high passing, he could be a really good up and back midfielder for us. Just because he's got really good tackling, he's fast to get up and back. Could be, but he doesn't have the high passing, so let's move on. This guy, another quite well-rounded one that we just quickly look at. I think not, though. It's not other position we could add. This guy, gosh, a few decent right wingers here. This guy, I think, again, just not quite for us. Yeah, don't use right winger. Use right winger. End of the strikers, which are very hard for us to pick up because we have so much depth already, so much strength in our strikers. Plus, we don't even need a youth one because we've already got this guy. So it's going to take quite the striker to tempt us to buy any. So not him. Too old. Too old. Too old. Not good enough. Interesting, but like interesting from that finishing composure movement. The control is low, which is bad for the poacher, but decent other stuff. But just not, again, like I'm saying, like if we needed a striker, maybe, but we don't. So too old. Just not as good as the one we got for the youth. Plus, he's going to not be in the youth anyway next season. And this guy, just probably not as good as the one that we've got. So just not tempting enough. So I think the one we got is 19 as well, maybe. Is that right? Yeah. So just comparing him to this guy, I think this guy's maybe a little bit better. It's close, but anyways, he's older and he's not better anyway. So, right, moving on to academy trialists. This guy got the flare revealed, 27. Okay, not great. Strength 45, good. Positioning 29. Right, so he finally got that tackling revealed, and we did sort of say, because he is the AML rather than potentially a DL or something, that it's probably going to be lower. It is. It's 3. I think unfortunately he just bombs out at this point. Excuse me, I'll be back in a minute. sorry about that. Back. Right, I'm going to make sure I put it on my list of things to do to see if I can work out how to pause recordings mid-recording, see if that's possible. So this doesn't happen again. But yeah, sometimes when I'm recording these, unfortunately something comes up. So, right, moving on. I think this guy, unfortunately, we speculated. We knew it was a risk. It's kind of backfired. And I think, unfortunately, what was potentially looking like the ultimate box-to-box midfielder now looks like an extremely average attacking player. Because low long shots, low dribbling, low flair, not particularly high finishing or composure. So, but we knew that it was not only was a possibility, but it was almost likely. Maybe not that low though. That's the thing. There's still a difference here between, you know, like 22 or something and 3. If it's 22, we still got something to work with here. He could still be a box to box. If the passing comes out really awesome, he could still be like a midfielder that's up and back, but just not particularly good at tackling. But at 3, that's very hard to work with, unfortunately. Right, so this keeper's natural fitness comes out decent. Now we even have a lesser rush, to be honest, because to have to pick the keepers, because we know that we want to clear this AML out now. So we only really then need to make the decision on the keepers if we see 2 players down here that we're happy to onboard. This guy, 7 tackling, just too many really low things. Just too many really low things. Too many really low things. Too many really low things. I mean, the 5 speed, 8 strength in particular. Just again, too many really low things. Don't use right wing back. Has some really low things, but he is fast, which doesn't particularly matter. Has high determination, which we constantly talk about how we really care about. Some of this really low stuff, well, the finishing doesn't matter, the crossing doesn't matter, the control does quite a lot if we want him to be this deep line playmaker. You care about passing, vision, and the control, because you'll get the control. The reason why the control matters for these playmaker roles in particular is, and the poacher role to a lesser degree, but still quite the degree, is just because the ball will be coming to them a lot. So the quicker they can control it to do something with it, the better. Now that's true for everybody, but the difference is with these players is that it's happening just with much more frequency, which makes the attribute more important. You know, as is their passing and vision more important, because they will do more passes and stuff. So, and for the deep line playmaker, the passing and vision becomes a big deal. For the more advanced one, you know, so does the other stuff. So does the dribbling and whatever. So basically, the ability to receive the ball, the more they get the ball, the more important the control is for them to be able to receive it, or at least when they're getting it to their feet. And also, the more important all the attributes that are associated with whatever they're going to do with the ball when they get it. It all just becomes more important because of the sheer frequency. So I think, unfortunately for this guy, for us, he's just not quite good enough on the whole. Moving on. It's too low stuff, too low long shots in particular, and tackling. Too low tackling. I think just, well, too determination. Let's not even. He's not. There's a lot of other reasons why we might not want to get him, but then it's like, well, maybe it could be made up for with good training, but then you see the 2 determination. Yeah, maybe. I mean, 3 determination is quite off-putting, but that aside, he does have 59 tackling, he does have 57 speed, he does have decent marking, he does have pretty good right back attributes. We don't use a right back. The aerial ability is coming up as the last one. He has good positioning as well. He could be a decent centre half. We don't need another one, mind you. Anyway, the thing is now is that we do just want to get rid of this guy. So At the moment, we're not that interested in him, but we haven't been interested in any of them, so we got to try and find. It's like who's the least worst in the end. It might be. So I'm looking at the guy thinking striker maybe, because he's got the 60 finishing, has good control, decent composure, bad movement, but decent, good speed, good strength, decent, like he's decent. Thing is, there's more to work with here than the other AML. Let's moving on. I think for the idea of converting them into a striker, the other guy's better. So moving on. Alright, so maybe we don't need to convert anybody. So he's got 52 determination, which is good. He's got some super low stuff, but let's go through it. So tackling, he's a striker, fine. Marking, even better, we don't care about that. And then natural fitness is an issue, but he has super high finishing, composure, long shots, control, decent movement. He could be quite a good goal poacher. That isn't 42 speed is still, it's not fast or whatever, but it's still way better than like 22. And again, like 28 aerial ability is not good at all, but still better than 4 or whatever. So, and then on top of that, he's got okay flair. The dribbling is pretty decent. Ideally, he would be stronger, but yeah, clearly he's coming in here for that AML. That's the thing. None of the other ones we would be happy to bring in, but this guy is like, well, at the end of the day, he will. We'll probably start the other striker. If we play 2, then he would start as well. Otherwise, this guy could come off the bench. He can get a bunch of appearances over the season. He's got good determination. So yeah, all right. Moving on, this guy. Okay, so now the question is, what is the question? What is the question right now? The question is, we are down to two more scouting pools after today. So I think ultimately the question is, with the keepers, does finding out the organisation really actually matter here for the decision between these two? I.e., if it's 1 versus 60, because that's the most extreme possible difference. If it's 1, does it mean we'd pick the other guy? But if it's 60, does it mean we'd pick this guy? Because if it doesn't make any difference what it is, we might as well swap out one of these keepers now for maybe that right back. If it does make a difference, we're not that bothered about the right back, so maybe it makes sense to wait. And it's a tough one, to be honest. I think unfortunately for us, the answer is it does matter. If that organisation comes out at 60, we probably are picking this guy, and if it comes out at 1, we probably aren't. Now, as to if it's 10 versus 50, or exactly where the line is drawn, so to speak, the exact attribute score, I'm not sure. But thing for us is that this guy is a bit better across the board. We probably would rather go for this guy, but this guy has the high determination, which really matters if they're starting every single match. And there is another thing conceptually that's better about this guy, is that all of his attributes nearly are pretty much just, well, he's got a few high ones, but loads are in that mid-range, which is good from just a development perspective, that he could end up really well rounded. When you've got a lot of super high attributes, well, to be honest, this guy's got 1, 2, 3, he's kind of got 5 in the 50s, and this guy's got 1, 2, 3, 5. So yeah, it's not that much different anyway. So we'll do that tangent on another day when we've got a better example. But loosely, the point here, which I'll go through with a better example at some point, is that the higher the attribute is, the less likely it is to progress higher, something like that. The less likely it is to make as much forwards progression as what a low attribute is likely to make. So, for example, with this keeper, it's more likely that over the course of his career that the one-on-ones might be able to gain, let's say, 20 to 30 attribute points than what the pairing is likely to be able to gain 20 to 30. So when you apply that conceptually to a keeper that's just, say, his starting attributes are all 1s and 60s, all those 1s have quite a lot of scope for growth, but all the 60s sort of have less scope, and you know, and then the comparison is something like if the player started with 30 in all of everything, you know, does that result in a better keeper with that extra sort of growth compared to the lesser growth of the 60s versus, you know, compared to the keeper that have the 60s will get lesser growth in those attributes but more in the 1s. Does that in the end result in a better or worse keeper than the one that had more good across the board progression across everything that started at 30? Quite the conversation, to be honest, and the answer is going to be completely scenario dependent on which attributes have what, but I think in this case it's not a strong example to just fully go through it for the next half hour. So, but I think the answer is yeah, if this organisation is super high, we're going with this guy. I think in particular because his command of area, aerial ability and speed are all low, which is a bad. So for example, the command of area helps them claim the crosses and stuff off the set pieces and other stuff, so themselves, but that's sort of just their ability to judge it, to grab it. It still matters their physical ability to get there. So it's like their ability or whatever to judge it and to grab it or whatever, but it still matters that they can actually get there. So their aerial ability matters because it's the, you know, the higher they can get to in the air to be able to grab it. So it effectively like amplifies their command of area having high aerial ability, so to speak, like, because they might be able to, you know, they can judge where they can get to, but they still have to be able to actually get there. So the more places they can get to, the better the command of it. Yeah, it makes higher command of area more valuable, having high aerial ability, basically, as does having high speed, because they can run to wherever they need to get to faster as well. So the fact that all of these are low means that this keeper is pretty bad at dealing with stuff in the box himself, but we have a lot of high aerial ability defenders. If we could have better organisation, they would be in better starting positions to be able to deal with the set pieces. So having really low organisation to set up the defenders for the set pieces, combined with not being able to deal with the set pieces very well himself, is a pretty bad combination all in all, which might tip us to get this guy, you know, who himself, you know, he's different because he is slow and doesn't have particularly good, so his command of area is basically the same. The speed and command of area, you could think of them as basically they're the same total attribute points and very close to each other, but then this guy's got 60 aerial ability versus 24, so this guy is you know, better at being able to deal with it himself, but not awesome at it, but just better. And then he's got organisation of 45, which is, you know, solid. So I think if this guy could come out at high, we would take him, I think. So basically, and if it's low, we probably will take the other guy, especially if it's ridiculously low, like 1 or something, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, that type of number. We'll go for the other guy. So I think we are still waiting, just on the basis that we're not. It'd be different if there was another player here that we knew that we would just be happy to take and we would and use for the next 6 seasons, but we don't see that player here. The closest there is this right back, which again, it kind of isn't that exactly, because it involves this aerial ability needing to be really high, and which may not be, and it also, so basically we take this guy and it comes out low and we have to move him out anyway. The difference being, though, irrespective of how this comes out, low or high or anything in between, we will be needing to get rid of one of these keepers regardless. So we're basically saying there is a difference here, because this one we'd only have to get rid of somebody if it's low or not high, whereas this other example we're saying it doesn't matter how it turns out, we need to get rid of somebody in the next 2 days. And it isn't a given at all that we would find a player better than this player. But I am going to pass. I'm going to stick with the keepers. I think in particular because we'd have to add a position. It's a massive amount of resource to spend on a player that has basically 3 determination. And whilst he could be usable if he has high aerial ability, he isn't as good as the other 2 centre halves we've already got anyway. Plus, we've already got one. So yeah, we're just going to stick with the keepers. So cheers. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you for the next one.